Welcome back to Life Without Secrets. Today we're talking about courage. What is it? Where does it come from? And how we can find it even in the most challenging moments. Our guest, Gina Gallaun, has lived a life shaped by bold decisions and inspiring experiences. Originally from Germany, Gina was a core team member at Wise, helping build the company into a global success. Now based in Colorado, she's the author of Embrace Your Brave in 30 Days, a journal filled with real stories of courage from women around the world. In this episode, Gina will share insights from her own journey, along with inspiring stories she's gathered from women who faced fears and embraced bravery in everyday life. We'll explore what it means to borrow courage from others, the power of community and support, and give you some practical tools to help you tap into your own bravery. If you're ready to embrace courage in your own life, Gina's insights will show you where to begin. So let's dive in. Gina,
Mm,
welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jillian. I love your podcast and I love that you keep it real. And I'm excited for a conversation where we keep it real. Let's do it. That's my kind of thing.
Right, I know. I'm so excited, and I have to share with you. We were chatting beforehand, but I was like, I have to save this for the episode just because I think it's so funny and ironic. When I saw the email for you to come on the show, I thought, well, isn't that perfect? Because my word for 2024 was courage.
No way. That was meant to
Yeah.
be. Now I'm even
Yes.
more excited to have this conversation. No way. I bet you have
Yeah.
some stories to tell. Yeah.
Always, yes, but I was like, "Oh, wow, well, that is definitely meant to be for, like, when this is," and just it was a great reminder as planning the next year, and just I was like, "This is really gonna be fun," and I love that you went on this adventure. You have lived such a dynamic life, like, from moving to Germany or moving from Germany and then helping build this global company, and then setting your roots in Colorado. But I want you to tell us about your journey and what inspired you to really focus on courage and then ultimately leading you to write your book.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to answer that. I want to tell you about my journey first and then the book
Yeah.
second.
Okay.
So I grew up in small town Germany, and I'm actually curious how much small town America is similar because right now I live in Colorado Springs. But that
Mhm.
small town in Germany was so small that we were three kids in third grade, and
Oh,
there were maybe 300 people there. And it was the kind of place where people lived for generations. And so we actually moved there when my mom was pregnant with me. So we were the outsiders moving in. And for outsiders moving in, it was actually challenging to be like accepted openly. So I remember there was this man on our street who would not greet my parents for 20 years. And after
oh,
20 years, he
wow.
started because then they were accepted, like they had proven their commitment. And I also remember like in kindergarten and preschool, sometimes not being invited to play dates just as part of this dynamic. So I bet maybe it wasn't all that bad in reality, but as a kid, you develop your own little story, right, about the world. So I developed this story for myself that I don't want to be like these people that live in one place for generations, right? And never experience anything else. And I was like, I want to be different. I want to move to other places. I want to have big adventures.
Mhm.
So I think that's been honestly a huge part of why at 18 in Germany, when you turn 18, you can make your own decisions, like vote and do whatever. Why I moved away and why I moved to Los Angeles first and then
Oh,
Spain and
wow.
then Estonia. Like looking back, I don't actually think that's like the healthiest motivation because there's some judgment in there. And which I think that's not really a good use of my time to judge people. That's not what I'm called to do, really. So I think looking back, it wasn't actually the healthiest motivation. And what's interesting is that like moving to another country sounds brave on the outside, right? Sounds wow. And it's
Mhm.
not easy. But looking back, I think actually what would have required or taken more courage of me would have been to stay and to make friends with people that are
Mm.
different. So I had some interesting surprises, like interviewing women around the world about courage, where they said that actually courage is way different for me than what it looks like on the outside. But so, okay, so that's why I've moved around a lot. And in my 20s, I lived in Estonia, which is this tiny, cool place with 1 million people. It's very small. So people don't know about it much, but it's an amazing
Mm.
place to live. And I think it was actually there in my 20s that I realized that even though I do quote unquote brave things, that a lot of my thinking and decision making was really fear based.
Mm.
And I read the works of he's called a neurotheologian. So basically somebody who's educated in theology and like brain science. He was talking about this idea of love bonds versus fear bonds. And he talked about how like a fear bond is when I say something to you or I don't say something to you. And it's because I'm afraid that if I don't say this thing or I do say this thing, like I'm afraid of how you would respond. Whereas a love bond is I say whatever I want to say because I trust that we can figure it out in our relationship. I remember coming across that concept, like by Dr. Jim Wilder, and realizing how much in my relationships, like I would say things or not say things really out of fear,
Yep.
or how
I
much,
can so relate.
yeah, right? That blew my
Yeah.
mind, that whole idea.
Mhm.
And even at work too, like how often I would scan for like the potential danger and then
Mhm.
make a fear-based decision. And and it just made sense to me. The way he described it is that our brains are really built though for making these love or joy motivated decisions because that's when we feel alive. And that's when like good results and life giving results come out of our decisions. So that just made sense to me. And then I was like, that's where I want to go. Like personally, I want to become that person more. How do I do that? And what helped me the most was to surround myself with people who were either also trying to do that or, yeah, so that I could hear their stories, so I could brainstorm with them.
Mm.
Like, what would it look like in this situation to not make a fear based decision? And that made a huge difference. And then I got to this point 3 years ago where I had an amazing job and I was presented with another opportunity to be promoted again. And honestly, it was a fantastic like opportunity. And inside of me, I could tell that my only reason for doing this was this idea that I will never get opportunities like that again. If I leave this company, if I don't take
Mhm.
this, mm, I will never get these chances again. And which really is like a fear motivated like motivation.
Yeah. Mhm.
It's not saying, yes, I'm gonna stay because this is exactly how I want to grow as a person. That wasn't it. And so I had some conversations with my friends about, okay, what would courage look like in this situation? And somebody asked me, what would it be like you to do if you were not afraid? That's actually a question I love, also by this guy, Dr. Jim Wilder. And I was like, if I wasn't afraid of what the future holds, what I'd love to do is take a break and go travel the world and interview women about what courage had looked like in their lives because I know how much
Wow.
those stories helped me figure out my path. And then I actually did that. And that was 3 years ago.
That is so
Yeah.
amazing. I just think that is so cool that and that is really courageous too, right? Which is so funny because you're wanting to be inspired by these women's stories, yet you're literally living out your own at the same time of being courageous to like actually go do this thing, which I think is so cool. So I feel like clearly courage played a role in your decision when you decided to make your own life and make the career move or make a personal change. And then you wrote these amazing stories of women around the world. And so, what inspired you to specifically focus on courage? And I think courage can mean different things to different people. And so, how would
Yeah.
you define courage? And what are some of the most surprising or inspiring ways you've seen women or you've heard through their stories how courage has showed up in their lives? That's a long
Oh,
question.
yes, I love sharing those. Yes. Okay, let's do the definition first. Let's do some cool
Okay,
stories now.
okay.
So the definition is first you make a decision, right? And that decision that you make about whatever, your job, your love life, your family, your friendships, is that motivated by some sort of fear it will be enough or whatever? Or is it really based on what you want out of life and who you want to
Mhm,
be? So there's a decision, but then the decision is one part. Then comes the part afterwards. Let's say you've decided to move abroad and you've made the big decision, you're there. And now it turns out to be so much harder than you thought. It's
Mhm.
glorious to take a brave
Mhm.
decision and telling your friends about it. And
Right.
that, yes, but then when very often it turns out harder than you thought, if it's still within your value system, if it's still in line with your values, to keep going, like even when it's hard,
Mhm.
that's the second part of courage, very important. And the less glorious
Mm.
part.
So
Um,
good.
yeah. And the thing that I found interviewing these women that I loved is that even though circumstances look very different in different countries, the kind of courage you need to muster is actually the same. And then how you do it, and I'll give you an example, but then like how you live that courage with personal style that looks like Jillian, that's like billions of different ways to do that because of how unique we are.
Mhm.
But for example, I was interviewing this woman from India, a woman from India, and she's saying what has taken the most courage of me was to not do an arranged marriage because I had met someone that I really actually loved and wanted to marry. And then when I asked her, so why did that take courage? She said, well, if you do an arranged marriage, when you hit your first marriage problems, you can call your parents and complain. You can complain to your girlfriends about your parents. And she was like, if I knew that if I didn't go with their suggestion, like when I hit marriage problems, which is gonna happen, that I
Mhm.
couldn't blame anybody else but myself and that I would have to figure it out with my husband. And she said, taking full responsibility for a decision
Mhm.
this big was so scary.
Never
And I was
thought
like,
of it
oh,
that way. Such a
no,
good perspective, though.
right? And I was like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, even though I never was presented with an arranged marriage, like
No.
I know that sometimes I have made choices and then they don't go the way I want to, and then I'm very
Mhm.
quick to blame somebody else for it. And
Mhm.
the taking full ownership over my part and my decision, oh, that actually really takes courage. So it's actually the same kind of courage, right? Between that woman in India and me, just different circumstances. And then maybe because we have different personalities, we might live that out with a different flavor or different style. But it made me feel very connected to see that really we need to learn the same type of courage. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I love hearing about all of the stories. And I think also many people find that courage isn't always something they feel on their own, maybe. I think for me, I've witnessed other people being brave and thought, oh, well, if she can do that and be brave, maybe that means I can too. Almost borrowing courage in a sense. And
yes.
in your experience, is this something that you saw when you were gathering the stories? Did you see anything like that? Was there stories where people borrowed courage in a way to create their own?
Yes. And I actually was wondering before the podcast, I was thinking about that. And I was wondering when you were 18, right, and
Mhm.
got pregnant, if there was somebody in your life somehow that you got to borrow some courage from. I was just curious to ask you that. And then, but yeah,
I
before
love
that,
that
it's
you're
really
asking me
important.
that. Yeah.
Yes. I'm just
I think, to be honest with you and very transparent, I feel like when I made those decisions, I actually was like you, and I was, making fear-based decisions. I mean, I think that it was, um I think we all do things in life because we want to be loved. We want to
yeah,
belong to something usually, right? And for me, growing up and being raised by a single mom who I saw her struggle, she worked so hard for us to just have basic things. And she always would tell me when you get older, she also told me not to ever rely on someone, which I've also had to deal with that in my own relationship
I
later
bet.
on and work through therapy. But she taught me her words always would tell me to be strong and you can do this. Don't rely on people like you're capable. Don't do what I did or whatever. And so I had this in the back of my mind. And um getting pregnant at 17, there was obvious things that happened to get to that point, but it was also because I wanted to be loved and I wanted to belong to a family. That
So
was
much sense.
the subconscious truth. Maybe that
Mhm.
wasn't like what I was thinking in that moment necessarily on the surface, but the subconscious truth to that is just I was fulfilling something I needed in a basic human need type of way. And I actually myself, and I've told this on previous podcasts in the beginning when I started this podcast, is like I made the appointment to go to an abortion clinic. I remember there was detours on the way. I was late to the appointment and I got to the appointment, uh, put my car in parked and I just started crying. And I was
Oh.
like, I can't go in there. And I remember, like, just putting my car in reverse, crying all the way home and just, like, praying, honestly. And after that, I would sit in the parking lot at night. I would get in my car. I had a little sunroof and I would sit in, like, an empty parking lot, like, at a, park by my house at night, and I would look up at the stars, and I honestly, I would just talk to God. "What do you want me to do?" And
Mhm.
I would just say I would promise that I was going to be the best mom, and I was gonna work hard, and that was a lot of my strength. And then the other part of it was, like, it was fear because it was, "What are people going to think of me?" And I had a teacher that said, "Oh, man, you had so much potential," like, when they
Ouch.
found out. Yeah, when
Yeah.
they found out I was pregnant, and I mean, to be honest, it sounds like it's so painful, and it was, and there was a fear obviously attached to that, but it did motivate me. It
To
worked.
show them.
Yeah, because it
That's
was like another thing I had in my basket of these are the reasons why you're going to do this. Number 1, it was
yeah.
like, you need to be able to provide and be there for your kids. My mom couldn't do a lot of things. We didn't get to go on trips. We didn't get to
Mhm.
explore the world because she had to work hard and we didn't have a lot of money. And I didn't want that I wanted to show my kids something else. And if I wanted to do that meant that right now, right in that moment at 18 years old, like, I was going to cry buckets of tears. I was gonna be up for 72 hours at a time if that's what it took. The pain, the hardship in the beginning is, what do they say? Like, pain now, reward later. Like, things are not instant gratification. I knew this was gonna be a long, treacherous journey, but I knew there was reward at the end. There was a life that I didn't live that I wanted for my family someday. And that's what I think what kept me being, courageous and knowing. And then I think every time we take a little step towards the path that we're on of being courageous, and at least for me, when I was on that path, every step I took, every semester that I finished, for instance, it gave me that courage I was looking for. Like,
Mhm.
every little stepping stone along the way was another way to prove to myself that just being having courage and being brave and doing the thing I said I was gonna do gave me more courage, more
Yeah.
confidence to know that I could do the thing. So
So in a
there's my
way,
long
you
story
were
for you.
almost it's very fascinating because I'm thinking, in a way, you were almost your own role model because you could be like, okay, Jillian from last semester did it.
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
100%, yeah, and I actually ended up becoming valedictorian, and then because I was there's always more than one valedictorian, and so you had to write a letter, and you had to then talk to these people in order to be picked to speak at, like, your graduation. And I wrote about how there was Play-Doh on my walls and in my hair, and I wrote about this journey of how it wasn't easy and how that's what it takes, and I got picked to tell my story, which I thought was really cool.
That gives me goosebumps. Yes. This concept of borrowed courage. Um,
Yeah.
so what I definitely saw is like there's one like typical role model. Like for example, there was a girl in Pakistan. And
Mhm.
her mom was her role model for making it out of a bad situation where, because she was a girl, she didn't get
Mhm.
any opportunities and she wasn't valued. Which, by the way,
Mm.
again, like we didn't grow up in Pakistan, but like the courage to free ourselves from like a situation, maybe at work, maybe a relationship that is not good for us, it still
Mhm.
also takes courage for us. So, very fascinating. But
Yeah.
so she had a mom as a role model. That's one thing that happens, like who has walked before her, like an actual example. But just as powerful is when you have, let's say, peers, and maybe they haven't walked down that path yet. There's this one study, one of my favorite studies, is where they put people on the bottom of a mountain and they let them estimate, like, how steep and how high is this mountain. And then they write down the number and then they put a friend next to them I don't know if they did it within like a B group or whatever, but basically the finding was that if you have a friend next to you, you're going to
Mm.
estimate the height or the steepness to be like 20% less.
Wow.
Um, yes. So that's the other thing I found. Even if you don't have a role model who has walked down the path before you, if you have peers that you can do this with and talk about it, share, brainstorm on the way, that is also so incredibly helpful in finding a courageous path for yourself. And then
Wow.
the very surprising thing that I think is so encouraging is that science actually has found in the absence of a real role model and in the absence of friends who can do this with you, that actually like fictional characters, or not even fictional, let's say like stories in a book or
Mm.
stories on a podcast, you don't even know the people, like they're not in your actual life, but
Mhm.
they still give your brain a model to follow. They still make you feel like you're not alone and you
I
can
love
do
that.
this. Yeah, I
Mhm.
think that's extremely helpful, hopeful that that's an option.
Yeah, one of my favorite movies that I've kept for years is Wonder Woman because I
Oh,
love that she's this, like, fierce woman. She has, like, masculine and feminine, though, and then the whole thing is about, like, evil versus just love and how we can, like, love, and I just, like I don't know, that has totally given me when I am feeling down even, I still will watch it today because it gives me this courage and
yes.
motivation.
That's a perfect example. Like, you
Yeah.
would not believe, like, how often when you have a hard situation that you're facing and you go,
Mhm.
"Okay, who's a movie character, like, who would
Yes.
inspire me?" And that you can even imagine having a conversation with them. That's another fascinating thing I found. So some of the women, that I interviewed, they like, faith was important to them, and they had
Mhm.
conversations with God, in
Yes.
some sort. And like you said, like, you had a conversation with God, and it
Mhm.
helped you make that
Mhm.
decision.
Yep.
So for all like my atheist friends, because I lived in Estonia, which is actually the most atheist country in Europe. So I've had lots of conversations. But if you don't believe in God, and right now you don't want to try talking to someone who you think is made up, right? Actually, also from a science perspective, you can imagine, let's say, a movie star or somebody from the past who's inspiring to you, and you can imagine having a conversation with them about your situation, and it will actually like regions in your brain will activate that will help you figure out a path. So that there's so much hope for whatever your faith is
Mhm.
right now. If you have friends or not, if you have a role model or not, there's so much support still. I think that's so
Wow.
cool.
Yeah, well, I think it puts our brain in a different position, right? We go from, like, almost like a negative to a positive, like, you're not alone anymore in that.
Yes, best
Um,
ever.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
a lot of us feel like it's hard to feel confident when we're facing fears or challenges. What insights or advice did the woman you interviewed share about finding confidence in, like, moments where life did seem uncertain or things in their life were uncertain?
I have to say, funny enough, it's the same theme of trying to
Okay.
connect to community. I think
Yeah,
humans are just made that way. We're not
they
made to
are.
be. Yep. That's
Mhm.
those are exactly the stories that people had to talk to a friend and get re-encouraged and reminded of their goals. And that's actually noticing that, like how important that was. I write in my book in the beginning, hey, if you're going to do this journey and read all
Mhm.
these stories and you're going to think about courage in your love life, in your family,
Yeah.
invite like a friend on it with you. So you have somebody to talk to about, hey, this is what I'm thinking for my work. It seems to be incredibly important.
Yeah. And I wanna also ask about, like, how when we find our own courage, like, how we can help somebody else find theirs. And you were mentioning a story in the email when we were talking, and so I wanna hear this story about where a woman felt fear and then found her own way to be courageous with a young teen
Oh,
girl.
yeah. Oh, with the teen girl. I wonder which one I was referring to. Oh, yeah, I think I know.
There's so many, I
Yes, but
know.
basically every story, my favorite part when I interviewed these women was to find out, okay, so now what did your personal style of courage look like? Because it
Yeah.
seems just like creativity is endless. There are billions
Mhm.
of options for how you can show up with courage. So I love hearing those examples. But I think the story I was talking about, I want to, anyway, I think that's the one. So
She used
I'm
it to
thinking,
then help I think how moms have used it to
oh,
help
yeah.
their own teen
Oh,
daughters.
yeah. That's another example. Actually, that's a example that surprised me because when I gathered these stories and then I decided to put them in a book. My
Yeah.
assumption was that the people that this will most help will be women like my exact age, like mid-30s. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. I thought
That was
women
your
that are like,
avatar.
yes, yes. And I thought
Yeah.
women that are like in their 50s and 60s, they have courage figured out. And then I get all these messages now from readers that are like in their 60s and 70s, 50s, and they say, guess what? I have to face this new fear, which is that I'm too old to do this stuff. So, um,
Mm.
actually, I want to tell you two stories if I can of like
Please. Yeah.
courageous persons that. So,
Please
this
do.
one lady, she's like 73, and her whole life she's worked with traumatized horses, and she has had them be
Wow.
okay again and compete in races again. And when she turned 70, she thought, now that I'm 70, I probably shouldn't be doing this anymore. I'm probably too old. What if I fall and hurt myself, right, while I'm on the horse? So
Mhm.
she stopped doing that work that actually is so important to her personally. And with
Mm,
that, disappeared some feeling of being alive and
mhm,
being
mhm,
important and having a purpose. And it did not feel good. And then she read these stories, right, of women from all around the world, and it inspired her to just ask herself. And this is actually, I think you just asked, did you ask, what can we do if we need to build courage?
yeah, yeah, mhm,
I found that questions are such a big deal. If somebody asks you a good question, or if you ask yourself a good question. So she then asked herself, what if I'm not too old to do this
mm,
work that's so important to me? And then
yes,
she said, well, if I'm not too old, like what I would do is I would buy myself a protective vest that if I fall off the horse, I'm protected. I didn't even know that existed. And so she came up with this whole strategy of going to the gym to build her muscle, like how to protect herself when she falls. And she just competed again in a 35-mile endurance race with a traumatized horse that she had. And she said,
wow,
yeah, she said, you know what? You're never too old to feel alive and do something meaningful. And I thought that
so
was
cool,
such like personal flavor courage. But
mhm.
interesting to notice how that question made a big difference for her.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
now that you say that, I remember my entire journey asking myself if I would regret this in 5 years from now if I didn't do it,
Oh,
and
that's a
and
good one.
yeah, and I would constantly ask myself and on those hard nights, like when you're up all night or when you're just so fatigued or when you wanna cry or whatever, I would remember feeling I would always ask myself, "If I am I gonna regret not putting in the work right now, 5 years from now?" And I still ask myself that, like, when I have big things come up, like opportunities, I'll ask myself, "If I don't do this now, am I gonna regret not doing it in 5 years?"
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna write down that question on my list because
Yeah.
that's a good one. That's
And
a
I
good
I just I don't wanna live that way, and I think one of the benefits of me having to go through that so young and being a mom at 18 is that I never felt or I don't feel like I have to choose between having kids or having a career or finding something new about myself because I've done it my whole life. That's all I
yeah.
know. So I don't know what it's like to have to choose because there was not really a choice. Like it was like, no, I have to do both. That was
Yeah.
just how it was. But now I choose to do both, right? I get to do both.
I have to say that is again such a hopeful message that you have to share from your life for me personally, because I only just became a parent like 2.5 years ago. And
Mm,
I'm still like the other day I had a meeting, really important meeting, and I was
yeah,
working from home. And like the day before, and they're 9 and 11. So my wonderful step kids that came into my life, I met them when
uh-huh,
they were 7 and 9. So the
I love
day
it.
before, I talked to them right about like how important that meeting is. And then the day off, I did everything I could to start it off in a good light. I talked to them about it again. I had like creative projects for the both of them. And in 20 minutes into the meeting, like my stepson screams like he's dying, and I have to
Yep.
step out of the meeting. And his head got crushed in the doorframe of my stepdaughter because she had asked him 3 times to leave the room and he hadn't respected her boundaries. So she decided to close the door on him. And like, after that, I thought, like, how is it possible to do meaningful work and be a parent? Like, literally, I had that moment where it's black and
Yeah.
white. It's not possible. So honestly, I'm still figuring this out. So for me, hearing you say that is like a gift.
Yeah, and you know what? I think at the end of the day, like, people, if they're parents, they understand, and if they're not parents, they have no business judging you.
That's so
So
true.
so I'm like,
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I've done podcasts lots of times where my kids are home and I just say, "Hey, you know what? This is real life over here. This is life without secrets."
I
Like,
like it.
if my kids are coming in here because they're whatever they need to fix something, like, that's just life and that we're just gonna roll with it. And I just do the forewarning because it is what it is. Like, life is what it is, and, like, there's nothing wrong with you when your kids are having their own difficulties.
See, that's why I like you. Thank you for doing your podcast this way and doing life that way. It is inspiring.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I try to make it work, but you know what? Like, life is life. That's just it, and you were courageous for doing it anyway. There's that.
Thank you. Oh, um, there was this other story I wanted to mention. Just
Yeah.
a
Yes, please
um,
do.
cool example for what courage can look like. So
Mhm,
this one lady from Romania, when she was a teenager, she was in a drama club, and she
mhm.
actually got the lead role to play Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. In front of her whole like town, the whole town came, and it was a huge deal. Like even reporters came,
Wow.
and she loved acting. So she does that thing. She actually feels great about her performance, and she remembers how her family came, and they were like waving and cheering. They brought her flowers. Like she remembers feeling loved and proud of herself. And then the next morning, she walks into the kitchen, and her family is acting weird, and they put like the newspaper under the table, and she's, "What's going on?" And then she gets a hold of the newspaper, and the reporter that was there literally wrote, they should have not casted an actress with acne for the role
No.
of Juliet. And she was a teenager, right? Like 14. And just imagine like the devastation. Like you're already
Mm,
ashamed as a teenager.
that's
Like,
terrible.
oh God, like devastating. And then, of course, like she cries. Of course, she thinks about quitting altogether and hiding in a hole and never coming back out, right?
Mhm.
And then her family helped her talk through this whole thing, right? And it made her understand that, you know what, I love acting. I love
Yeah.
like showcasing my talents like that. And so they talked about, well, how could you do the thing you love, even in the presence of critics that say mean stuff
Mm.
that's like
Mhm.
inappropriate? And she figured out that the way she wanted to do that is by focusing on the people that love her, that do show up to those events, right? Focus on the flowers,
Mhm.
focus on them smiling, and that's how she did it. And now the fact that she didn't give up serves her so well as a grown woman.
Wow.
She's like very successful, works in an international company, and she gives presentations in front of thousands of people. And this is how she faces the possibility of criticism.
And
And so,
nowadays, that is so relative to everything because you do anything when you're on social media, and it does take courage.
oh my gosh, yes,
Mhm.
yes, it really does.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
I had one reader to share with me the other day that her daughter, who's like maybe, I think your daughter is 9, right? 2
Yeah.
or like something
Yeah.
like my
Yeah,
stepdaughter
she's
too.
fine.
Yeah, and her daughter was yeah, same age. Oh, it's a sweet age. But yeah, so this reader was saying her daughter came home from band practice upset because somebody had made fun of her. And then the mom pulled out the story and read it to her. And her breathing, the daughter's breathing calmed down and she stopped crying, and like she was able to figure out a way that
Mhm.
she wanted to be brave in that situation. So just when we get to hear stories, my gosh, it gives us so much inspiration for, you know, what we could do with
Yeah,
our own lives in the scary
that is
situation.
so cool. I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. I think I'm like, I need that for my daughter too. It is so important. And my son, like my son, he got glasses in October.
Ah, yes.
And the first thing he said when he learned that he had to have glasses was he was afraid that people were gonna make fun of him. And I
No.
thought it was so sad that because I was thinking like, there's so many people that have glasses. Like I didn't even think of it that way. And to
Yeah,
me, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're just the cutest thing I've ever seen. But he was generally like very concerned about it. And I noticed he started going into a little bit of a shell with
makes
his
sense.
personality just from wearing the glasses. And so we've been sharing stories and pointing out and we've seen a couple people with, like, similar glasses, and people are always complimenting him, and he's kind but he also has to, we're sharing the stories but he also has to, like, find his own way, I feel like. Have
Yes.
you seen that as well? Because it was, like, yesterday we were going to church, and he wanted to go to big church, like, not with his age group. He wanted to come
Yeah.
with us, And then when I asked him why, he said, "Because I haven't been in there with my glasses yet."
Oh,
He just
wow, that's amazing.
he wasn't ready,
I
and so
mean,
I let him come in the big church, and I said, "I think he would have been just fine," but he wasn't ready yet, and I
yes.
think next time he will be, I feel like, but he needed that little step in the meantime to get there.
I think that is amazing, by the way, that he was able to articulate what it is instead of just being like, well, I just, that he was honest
Yeah.
about it is amazing. And then really he did find a little, almost like a little step towards that,
Yeah.
um, to warm up to the idea. It reminds me of, I mean, not exactly the same, but it reminds me
Mhm.
of this one lady who I interviewed, and she loved being in the mountains. That's where she felt bliss. And she wanted to unlock a next level of bliss and climb even higher mountains where you have to actually scale like a vertical wall.
Oh,
But she
wow.
was afraid of falling. And then what she did is just in the safety of a climbing gym, she
Mhm.
practiced falling. So to me, your son going to church, but going to big church first is almost like practicing walking in there, and
Yeah,
like he's working
totally.
himself up.
Well, and you're right, because in that morning, he told me he wasn't gonna go at all.
Yeah.
And then he ended up coming with us, and so, yeah, I think you're right, and it's almost the same as when the woman that was going to get on the horse, for instance, right? She went to the gym, right? And she got herself strong, and I think courage is not just the act of the doing, but also the preparation for
Yes.
even.
Yes.
Is
I absolutely love that. Yes.
that's what I'm
Yes.
hearing from a lot of
Yeah.
the stories. Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, it's like the preparation before and then
Mhm.
the keeping going afterwards. Really, the decision is just that, again, that one Instagram worthy moment. But yeah, the
Yeah.
preparation, yeah, before and after is the key to success.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've mentioned questions and asking ourselves questions. You also have a journal that can include some prompts to help people explore their dreams. So I want to talk about, is there one you'd like to share, or do you want to just talk about it and how
Yeah.
you'd recommend to someone looking to become more courageous?
Yes, it's actually one and the same. So it's not a separate journal. It's in the book
Okay.
because, yeah, because what I learned is how much questions play an important role in you figuring out your courage. And
Oh, I
those
love that.
women, like after they told me their stories, they also asked me questions. And that really got me
Mm.
thinking. So I put the story there and then I put 1 to 2 journaling pages with questions that these women designed. So you can,
Oh, cool.
yeah, so you can take your inspiration and then apply it to your own work situation that is like nerve wracking. So if I were to share, okay, so I want to share one example. I talked to this lady in Brazil, and since she was a little girl, her dream was to have a nice house, to have a good job, and to have a beautiful marriage. That was what she wanted out of life. And then by the time she was 40, she had a great job, she had a beautiful house, and she had been a bridesmaid like 22 times, but
Mhm.
never at her own wedding. And like at 40, she said to herself, man, like I have to face that this is not happening and ask some brave questions. And so what she ended up doing is she asked her friends, this is a dream of mine. It's not happening. Like, how do you see me getting into my own way of
Mm.
this dream? And so she asked them, and they were like, you can be really, you can be controlling. And so in your work, that's helping you a lot. But in your relationships, it's not helping that much. So
Mhm.
because she got
Mhm.
that feedback, she then started to work on herself. And now she's married and she has this tattoo
Aw.
that says, let it go. And she told me that now, when they're about to head out maybe for dinner with friends and her husband is running late, that would be a situation where in the past she would try to control it and get him to hurry up. And now she says she goes to the kitchen and makes herself a cup of tea and sits down and looks at her too and says, let it go. So,
Wow,
but
I love that story.
right. But what changed everything is that she honestly asked herself, hey, there's a dream that I've had for a long time I'm not getting any closer whatsoever. And she asked, like, how might I be getting in the way of this dream coming true or even of this miracle happening that I'm
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
praying for? And
Yeah,
that's a
good for
question that's
her.
been right.
Yeah,
Um,
that is brave in itself.
yeah.
Mhm.
That's a
I think it's
no,
really cool and brave of
yeah,
her to, and to actually take it in as a thought and not be defensive, but
yeah,
take this as a symbol of love.
yeah. that takes so much courage to put
Mhm,
defense mechanisms down
mhm,
and just
mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
Wow. Well,
Mm,
this has just been so incredible, and I feel like we could just talk for hours and hours, honestly. And
me too.
I actually can't wait to have your book in my hand, and I think my daughter is going to really enjoy reading this too. She loves reading, but she's very particular about the books that she reads, and this just
Oh,
sounds like something that she would love. So, I'm so
my
excited.
my stepdaughter actually when I published the book, and she's 9, and she has only so much like pocket money, right, like allowance. "I'm buying one of your books." I was like,
Oh.
"That is the most adorable thing."
It
Um,
really is.
that was like anyway, she's very cute. But I'd be happy to send you one and hear your
Oh,
thoughts.
oh, yeah. Well, I can't wait. I can't wait to read the whole thing. I love that you went on this journey. I was actually telling Gina before this that I had read about Gina and how she went on this journey and asked all these questions to find courage and what inspired these women to be so courageous. And I was just watching about blue zones, like where people live to 100 or greater, and I just thought this is so similar. And I think that it's so inspiring and it's powerful for people to read and to understand and to give themselves courage and confidence to go out and do those things as well.
Yes, yes, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah.
So such a gift. Is there any advice that you would want to give listeners who feel stuck in fear or doubt, but really want to embrace courage in their lives?
Yeah, I mean, I would really bring it back to what we've talked about before is to number one, like how can you increase the amount of those stories in your life? It could be by listening to your podcast, by reading books, or by setting up like a courage coffee date with somebody who you think is of that mindset, like once a
Oh, I
month,
love that. Courage
with
coffee dates.
yes, with just the
Yes.
goal of the exchanging courage stories. And that's the whole goal of that meeting. And to make it clear from the beginning so that it doesn't go into like gossip or
Mhm,
whatever.
mhm, mhm.
Um, but yeah, so increase the amount of those stories in your life and bring some people along that you feel are on that same journey because that will so increase your chances of actually taking
Yeah.
brave steps towards the life you want and getting closer to it.
I mean, I feel like that we should just start a whole, movement right now. Like this just when you said courage coffee dates, I was like, how can that be a thing, like, around the world? That is just so cool. I think I always speak to that on my friends. Sometimes there's more people we can share our bad with than we can share our good with, and I think that's especially in with women. And I think one of the ways that we can empower other women and bring them up and support them is we can have things like courage coffee dates where we get to listen to how this woman next to us was courageous this week
Yes,
and celebrate her. Like
yes.
what
And
I think that's amazing.
yes, and I agree with you that it seems like there's more people we can share the bed with. And
Yeah.
And it must be because of how our brains are built, like from a long time ago, to focus on what's going wrong to keep us
Yeah.
alive.
Absolutely.
So we do have to put some effort in. If we just sit, I feel that way. If we just sit down with no like intentionality, it does go that direction. It's just, I think, what our brains do. But it's also not that hard to put some intentionality there and invite someone
Yeah.
for a virtual date and make a change. It's totally possible to make a change like that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so now people listening, I would love to know. So please let me and Gina know. We'll put our info in the show notes. If you listen to this podcast, for one, go get her book and do the journal prompts because they sound absolutely incredible. And two, arrange a courage coffee date with a friend and
Yes.
do that. I think that's so amazing, and then share it
Yes.
with us, tag us, whatever, because we wanna know, obviously.
Yes.
If anybody's listening right now, please let us know. I think I love it when people reach out to me and they, like, say that they listened or what they gained or how incredible that guest was because, we do this and we don't get money from it. This is just, like, from my heart to yours, and so it helps keep everyone going. It's a courage. it's a courage coffee date for me to,
Yes.
hear what people get, just like when people send you messages about the book and you get to know that your work actually helped somebody and
Yes.
inspired somebody. I think it is just a beautiful thing. And one of my favorite things from this podcast so far is that it was maybe, I don't even know if it was 6 months when I started it. I had a teenager from across the United States somehow listen to my podcast, and she had a friend who got pregnant, and she was only 16, and she was gonna drop out of school and go work at McDonald's or something, and she heard my story and my podcast, and she ended up going back to school and is had her baby and is working hard and still going for her goals. And I was like, if I have done nothing else in the entire time I have had a podcast, that made it worth every single second.
Oh my goodness. The
Yeah.
ripple effects of you
But the
doing
fact
it.
that she reached out to me to tell
Yeah.
me, like, has made anything I do with this podcast worth it, you
Yes.
know?
I mean, it's you're good now. You've had the impact like one life.
I know, I'm
Okay, good,
good.
good. Yes.
Totally. Like, I am so good. Yeah, wherever this goes from here, that's fine. But
That's bonus.
that makes everything worth every single
Wow.
second of work,
Yes. Tag
you know?
Jillian with a coffee emoji and a
Yeah,
heart, and then
yes.
tell her.
Yes, for sure. Well,
Yes.
Gina, this has just been incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and all these inspiring stories of courage with us. Like, it has seriously been such a gift. And being with you and getting to know you and having this conversation is just, this has blessed my day.
Thank you. I feel the same way that it's been a gift to talk to you. Like new ideas came out of the conversation. And
Yeah.
if anybody listening would love to read these stories, I actually have a discount code that I
Oh,
created where you get
cool. Oh my goodness.
20% off. And the
Wow.
discount code is secrets, like life without secrets. And then my website is wavesandwords.org.
I was going to ask you that next. How can we get in touch with you? Wavesandwords.org.
Yes.
I love it. Okay, and then is it the best way to contact you just from your website?
Yes. All the links to like my Instagram are on there.
Okay,
So if you like, it's
cool.
easy to find it. Yes. Oh, thank
Yes.
you, Jillian. This has
How
been just my
fun.
highlight of definitely the day, but
Aw. Honestly,
the
mine
week.
too, so I'm glad we feel the same.
Yeah.
Well, for everyone listening, I hope you're leaving with a new perspective on courage and the encouragement to take even small steps towards your own brave moments. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who could use a dose of courage. Go have a courage coffee chat and be sure to subscribe to Life Without Secrets for more inspiring conversations. Until next time, remember, courage is inside all of us. Hey there, it's Jillian from Life Without Secrets. Ever feel like you and your partner aren't quite on the same page? Well, you're not alone, and that's exactly why I created our latest issue of Truthful magazine. It's packed with insights and stories about bridging that gap and finding a deeper connection. We're diving into real conversations about needs, feelings, and how honest dialogue can rekindle that closeness that you've been missing. Why not explore this together? Go grab your free copy right now at lifewithoutsecrets.com and turn those pages into shared moments. Can't wait for you to dive in and share your thoughts with me.